This is the only Sunday afternoon talk where I've never said, where I haven't had to say now, please be quiet, sit down. You all kind of sat down and be quiet before I'm ready. It's the first time. And today is the 10th day of October in the year 2010. So 10-10-10. And I hear that's supposed to be auspicious or something. It is? So are there any questions? Yes?
I don't have a lot of introduction into Buddhism, but I've just heard the word mindfulness. Does mindfulness, the way I understand it, does it lead into inaction, as if taking all our problems and putting them under the mattress? Because in mindfulness, we just stay away from the problem, be aware of it, but we don't do anything to it. Is it not inaction?
Well, I mean, what it allows us to do is respond through wisdom rather than through just habit. Like, it doesn't mean we just kind of resign ourselves to being passive. It's not like passive, a kind of passivity, but it gives us perspective. So much of our lives is just a force of habit and reactivity. And what mindfulness allows us to do is observe these habit patterns, and then from there we begin to see what's worth doing, what's skillful and what is not. And because then we're developing a wisdom. So our active life then is much more done through skillfulness, mindfulness, wisdom, rather than just through reactivity and habit patterns. So it's like what mindfulness does is it puts you in a relationship to the conflicts, internal or external, in a way that you're not, you have like you see them in perspective. You're not just caught into reacting to them, or through either indulging or getting carried away or trying to reject or suppress anything. It gives you,
Help me to solve my problem.
yes, it will. That's where you can resolve. You can't solve your own problems through the ego. You have to get outside the ego to see the real problem.
But it's just there, the problem is there. I know now, after being mindfulness, and I'm staring at my problem, that's some kind of betterment, because I'm not panicking. The next thing is, but the problem is there. I mean, it's there, it's not getting there.
Well, the problem, this realm is a problem. Let's face it. It's not just you. So you become more kind of accepting of this realm, and then when it's time to resolve problems, personal problems or whatever, this is where patience, wisdom, we have this perspective in which we're not just trying to get rid of problems, but sometimes we have to be patient with ourselves, with the people we live with the society we're in. And then we have this kind of spontaneity, ability to respond intuitively to conditions, whether it's through not doing anything or through doing something. Sometimes, many times it's better not to do anything, and other times it's proper to do something, and that's intuitive, not prescriptive. And this is where through mindfulness you're actually getting in touch with this intuitive intelligence more, and you can trust that rather than just arbitrary judgments about how you feel or like or dislike something, or wanting just to get rid of problems. Because, as I said, this realm is a problem, really. There's so many influences, so many conditions affecting each one of us, and we tend to see it from a very personal and a very limited way of looking. And mindfulness gives you perspective on that, to where you can solve problems, but it's not through getting rid of them or seeing them through personal judgments, but through understanding.
is this mindfulness a general sweeping panacea for all the problems, or is it case by case?
Well, it's you have to find out for yourself. Any more? Yes?
If I misunderstood you, please do correct me. Stopping the thought process, one can stop the inner conflict and develop the peace in mind. To do that one, you said we have to do the insight meditation, Vipassana. Vipassana is the contemplation of the five aggregates. Look at the thought process. I mean, you have to think about the body contemplation and mind contemplation.
Yeah, but you're beginning to, with the emphasis on mindfulness, which is not a thinking, but it's we use then the teaching like the four foundations of mindfulness, not to think about them or analyze them, but they're more like directing our attention. So like the first foundation is like Gayanupassana Satipatthana. So it gives you a point of directing your attention to just the physical body. But you don't think about the body, you're not thinking about it in terms of self-view or, value judgments of good, bad, but it's just observing, being aware of what it's like to sit or stand, walk or lie down or breathe, and just the sensation, just being aware of your body as a sensitive form, which depends on conditions changing, whether it's too hot or too cold or just right, but you're observing, your relationship to the body then is through observing it rather than just being caught in reacting to heat and cold or pleasure, pain. And then with the Vedana, Citta, Dhamma, the other three foundations, they're not to be grasped as teachings or doctrines, but they're more or less pointing at, particularly emphasizing maybe feeling or Vedana or emotional citta, the quality of mind, or using Dhamma. See, like the Dhammanupassana Satipatthana is really where we take the Four Noble Truths and the Buddhist teachings these become more like ways of examining and seeing, but it's not through an analysis or logic or reason. So these are the beauty of the Buddhist teaching is it's not about just intellectual indulgence in Buddhist thought, but it's actually taking those things, their teachings pointing at, and they're pointing, like Luang Por Chah pointing here, you're looking here. You're not seeking wisdom as some external thing or outwardly anymore, but you're beginning to look at the way you're feeling, or physically feeling, or emotionally feeling, or the doubting, or anger, or greed, or whatever conditions you're looking at, desire. You have perspective on these, which is not, say, culturally attuned to just judgment and values that we acquire through maybe cultural conditioning, but through wisdom, through discernment. So it's that's what I think. My attraction to Buddhism was because it had this practical side to it. It wasn't just kind of superb intellectualizing and theorizing on a high level of thought, but actually gave you very practical tools to use to deal with life, with being human, with feeling, and all that condition, with the aging process, and pain and sickness and loss. We have to experience loss, of parents or loved ones or separation. We all, grief and things like this, the strong emotions that we all have to experience in our lives if we live long enough. And this gives us a way of observing. It doesn't mean we don't grieve or don't experience things, but we're looking at grief and loss in a different way than just on a personal, emotional, conditioned way. And so we're always learning from the experience of life, from sickness, from pain, from pleasure, from loss, from not getting what we want or not wanting what we have, things like this. And it's kind of brilliant pointing, and that's why the Four Noble Truths, the first Noble Truth is the dukkha, or suffering. And so there's nothing theoretical or esoteric or arcane or it's not a highly evolved kind of state. It's a common state to all of us, isn't it? We all suffer. And so it's pointing to something so common, so ordinary to any human being on this planet. And then taking that and examining it in a way that we're no longer just reacting to suffering out of trying to get rid of it or just being defeated by our own experience of pain or loss. So we have a way of really using our life in a way that of wisdom rather than through just developing more, increasing our habitual tendencies and fears and obsessions that we might have, which we on a condition level we have no perspective on. We just judge it, and we make judgments about our emotions or see ourselves. This is why this is a bad feeling or this is a good one or whatever. So on the condition level, we tend to see it in terms of good and bad, right or wrong. From intuitive awareness, then we begin to see it is a condition changing, and it gives us that perspective that is not judgmental, but really we're not saying it isn't. It's something else. It is what it is, and then we begin to investigate, to let go of the just blind, heedless attachments to conditioned phenomena, which doesn't deny or reject, but it puts them in perspective where we can actually discern the presence and the absence of them. Like in the Buddhist teaching, you observe the suffering and non-suffering. So in my own experience, when I don't get what I want, or things aren't going the way I want them to, or the difficult scenes, or just physical pain, I can actually, see the desire to wanting to get rid of the pain, or the disease, or inconvenience, or not wanting things to be the way they are, wanting something I don't have, and then I create this suffering around that. Then I let go of that suffering through mindfulness. You let go of it, and then you see it, and then it ceases. You're aware of it and its presence, and then if you're patient, it'll cease, and you're discerning the absence of suffering. It's like this. So then this absence of suffering, we don't notice. We don't usually, we tend to go from one thing to another. So we're suffering, so we do something, have a drink, or look at the internet, or television. So we distract ourselves when we suffer. So we never get a perspective on how conditioned phenomena operates. Yes?
Yeah, you talked about not laying emphasis on development of certain aspects of your personality. Yet in the Fourth Noble Truth it says descriptions on right speech, right action, right livelihood. How does this fit in with right mindfulness?
Well, like in the Buddhist terminologies, you have this sequence of dana, sila, bhavana, which means like generosity and morality, and then meditation or cultivation of the path. Like bhavana is really like meditation, or Vipassana meditation, cultivating the path of awareness. And then like in Thailand, for example, the attitude of dana, or generosity. So I was at Thanajan Mahalao's monastery up in the Midlands yesterday evening, and talking about this, about how, because many of the people, his monastery is way out in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, and all these Thai monks in this this house in the middle of the real English countryside, and then a lot of people there were found it difficult to understand some of these concepts, and so explaining how the like this sense of generosity is an encouragement to just not be so selfish. Like it starts out on a level of just sharing something you have with somebody else, So there's always this encouragement towards skillfulness, towards good action, generous action. And then, and that's before even the morality level comes into it. So, and this is the very kind of so integrated into the Thai cultural conditioning that their immediate response is always to share things. Thailand is noted for its hospitality because its cultural, its basic cultural attitude is based on generosity, and then. And then the sila is where we have decided to take responsibility for action and speech. So like the 5 precepts or 8 precepts or whatever, but the 5 precepts is the basis. So that means we now, like you have to ask, I can't just tell you to take the 5 precepts. It's forbidden by, Buddhist monk, we can't go around saying you've got to take the 5 precepts. You've got to ask me to take the 5. So this puts me, it means that you're taking on the 5 precepts, and me not forcing you to keep them. Now this is, seeing that this is something coming from you, a kind of advancement, a sense of your own personal integrity, of taking responsibility for what you do, how you live, and your use of speech, so that we're using, the physical body we have for that which is skillful and good, and rather than for using it to harm or steal or deceive anyone or anything. And so then the 5 precepts is a kind of a good standard of moral boundaries that is very helpful, and it creates this sense of self-respect. Like this dana and sila, what it does on the ego level creates a sense of self-worth and self-respect, because you're actually, moving in a direction that you can feel respect for. You're living your life in a way that you respect and that other people respect. So then you have this sense of your own self-worth as just a personality, as an individual person in this society, and then bhavana from there, which means that you feel this inclination to, even being a good person has its problems, so and so you begin to have this urge to meditate, to develop wisdom. So like skillful action is a quintessential, it's like a sine qua non condition for living, to act on what is good, good intentions, good actions, and to refrain from acting on things that are harmful, deceitful, cause division and problems to yourself and others. So it's like skillfulness in action and speech, like you have, usually you talk about dana sila bhavana or sila samadhi panya. So sila samadhi panya is morality, concentration, and wisdom. But as you explore the Noble Truths, then the 4th Noble Truth takes you to, you start from wisdom, because there's what they call samaditi, or right understanding. And it's from insight rather than from just grasping some idea of right understanding. Right understanding as intuitively, it's through insight, not through intimidation or through your own, deceiving yourself. And then the rest takes from that discernment and right understanding toward right speech, right action, right livelihood, and then the right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So it's called the Eightfold Path. And then that is like it works. It's eightfold. It's not 8 steps. It's how it kind of works together. It's if there's right understanding, then the rest follow from that. How we live our lives, what we do physically, and how what we say and speak and so forth is coming from right understanding rather than from me trying to be a good person. But on the level of just dana sila, then trying to be a good person is skillful. It's a direction to encourage people to do, just for worldly happiness or a sense of self-respect. You're living in a way that you can respect yourself. And this is very important because so many of the problems that I've seen here is people, don't have that self-respect. They tend to see themselves too much from a critical mind. They see there's something wrong, or they shouldn't think like this, or shouldn't feel like that, so even very good people who are worthy of respect can feel a lack of self-respect because they just operate too much. They're too bound into their critical minds and making too many, exaggerating the defects or the flaws or the other things that one experiences in one's mind. And so it's like, but when you take responsibility for action and speech, you're not always maybe going to because there isn't wisdom operating, yet you're developing a skillfulness and a kind of confidence in yourself as a person, which leads into bhavana or meditation and understanding.
We are taught to be staying in the present and not to be attached to the past and the future. So, how does that kind of work when you're a lay person and you still need to make future plans and have ambition? How do those two things come together?
Well, like the emphasis on mindfulness here and now is just pointing to experience now. You say so. I mean, everything, experience is always now. The future is the unknown, and the past is what you remember. And I think it's very important to recognize this, that now is where you experience life. Whatever, whether you're alone in your room or studying for exam or planning for the future or you're regretting things of the past or whatever, when you remind yourself of here and now, suddenly you're centering yourself in a way, you're grounding yourself. And then of course, whatever you have to do, as a student or as a professional person or whatever, you have a way of, you have a center, a kind of grounded center to operate from. Then you can do what you can in terms of the practicalities of planning for the future or whatever. Like for me, as a Buddhist monk, a head monk here at the monastery, then you should see my calendar. All the from now, I'll be leaving for Thailand on the 23rd of November. Every day is filled in with things. So I plan for the future. But I know what I'm doing. It's not just, always looking to the future for something. It's, because the ignorant mind tends to, we're always thinking of success in the future or getting something. So we tend to ignore the present. And so a lot of our tendencies to compulsive activities is just planning for the future or just distracting ourselves because of restlessness or anxiety, and we don't really have any perspective or understanding of what we're doing. But with this, then this recognition of the present and of this sense of letting go, it means that then we begin to have a sense of being grounded and a center point rather than just caught in the momentum of obsessive plans or ambitions and anxieties that we have about the future. It gives you a way of doing what you have to do, in perspective. You're no longer just coming from ignorance and personal ambition, but you a sense of achieving in the world is then in perspective. It's no longer just a blind force kind of enslaving you to compulsive behavior. And so then, if you have ambitions in a professional way or whatever, then it's in a perspective that isn't just, the problem with worldly life is sometimes we just caught in ambitious goals and we're just obsessed with them, and we lose all perspective on everything else. This gives you a balanced sense of being able to deal with the ordinary life and your goal or achievements, and that it's not doesn't make you incapable of doing those things, but it gives you a clearer, more sense of confidence and ability to respond to situations in a way you can't do if you're just caught in obsessive, compulsive motivations. And then there's a lot of fear, anxiety, and everything just... and if you burn out, people can easily burn out from being caught into that without any perspective on it. Yes?
The group that I'm in, recently we lost our teacher, Lama Lobsang Darji. And so we feel a bit kind of abandoned. And we have to go through a period when we won't have a formal teacher, and then a period of getting a new teacher. And I wondered, seeing as you've experienced this with Ajahn Chah, and other people will be experiencing it with you, if you could make some observations about going through this kind of change.
Well, it's, because this is, in the scripture, when the Buddha was passing on, his disciple Ananda, said, "What are we going to do without our teacher? When you go, who do we have? Who should we look to?" And then the Buddha said, "I leave you the Dhamma Vinaya as a." So it's like this is quite important. The Buddha wasn't pointing to himself as "I'm your teacher," but he gave us conventional forms like the Dhamma as in scriptural, or in that days they didn't have any written scriptures, but they memorized things. So the Dhamma teachings of the Buddha and the Vinaya, a form of a conventional form for restraint that helps develop mindfulness. So then this is so when Luang Por Chah died, I felt what I felt was, I felt this grief, loss of a teacher, but I also felt that now the practice of Dhamma Vinaya was up to me, and and the only way to kind of really, I thought the one way I can really show my gratitude to Ajahn Chah is to actually put it into practice. And even if doesn't need him anymore, just do it, because I certainly had the clear teaching from him, and so it gave me a kind of impetus. Actually, his death, the sense of I have to develop this. I can't depend on Luang Por Chah being around, and so it I found it kind of a sense of, I think it's like when you're as long as your parents are alive, you're always their child. And when your parents die, then you suddenly realize you have to live your life, and you're in that category now, not being anybody's child, being an orphan or something. And then in a way, one can be depressed or saddened or grief-stricken about it, but also it gives you a sense of it's up to me now. I can't depend on mom and dad or the all these elders or people I depend on. That suddenly I have to really take it on myself. I found that very helpful to reflect in that way. And then different teachers of different, you get used to a teacher, you get very fond of a teacher. And that needs to be examined too, how attached we get to teachers. And that, and then when the teacher is gone, then we feel a sense of loss. But that's also part of the practice. Then when a new teacher comes, a relationship, one can compare the new teacher with the old teacher. But sometimes there is, the first teacher's a better one, but that isn't really important. The teacher's giving, or sometimes the second one is better than the first. So this is you can't control. It just happens. But that see everything is your teacher. Because it's not just a one-way relationship, like I'm your teacher and then you're my student. I learn from you too. It's a interrelated thing, and I have maybe the conventional position of teacher and you as student, but that's merely convention, because we all learn. I learn from living in this community, from these people, these monks, these nuns. It's not just me teaching them and they're perennial students of mine, and I'm always teaching them. I'm also learning from them. And so then we begin to see things in this way, where we don't really, and we gain more confidence if your teacher, the one that's leaving, is giving you the good teaching, then trust in that and develop it. And then it's up to you to really take it on, rather than depend too much on a living physical teacher. And then the loss of the feeling of grief or loss through separation is like this. You're going to feel a sense of loss or grief about losing a teacher, but that's also part of our human condition, is that separation from the loved is suffering, and separation from what we're accustomed to, and we begin to understand the way we attach to somebody as a teacher. Nothing wrong with it, but because I was very attached to Ajahn Chah, but he never he was never pointing to himself as I'm your teacher and that I have to depend on him as a person. Ajahn Chah's gift was to always encourage me to look at my attachment to him. The way I tended to see him always in terms of, you're the wise Ajahn, you're the wise teacher, and I'm just the ignorant ignorant foreigner. I was quite willing to do that. I like being dependent on somebody like Ajahn Chah and have him tell me what to do, but he'd never go along with that game. So he'd force me to look at what I'm actually doing. Yes?
What is our duty towards our parents, and how can we fulfill it if we have a difficult relationship with them, or fears and negative feelings towards them?
Well, like that relationship is very powerful for all of us, parents, and so we've, this is where we, it's really very important to see, to observe, to be mindful of that, of resentments or anger, repressed anger we might feel towards the way we perceive our parents or the way they treated us. And so it's, to just say you should, the advice is to respect parents, and that's because we actually, they gave us birth. Like, without my mother, I wouldn't be here. and so it's this sense of respect, but also, so that on the level of respect is part of it. But also, we always carry other feelings about the experience of, because our parents, none of us were born through perfectly enlightened mothers and fathers. So they were, like my parents, I realized, were not arahants. And then as I grew older, and I used to be quite critical of them when I was in, teenage, and then as I grew older, I began to see how difficult life is. I began to appreciate my parents because they did, they provided a stable home, and they were good people. Basically, I could think of things I resented about them, but now at 76, I can only think of my parents with love and gratitude. And I think age helps. When you're 18, you know it all anyway, know better than what your mother and father, how the mistakes they've made. And at 76, I don't know anything really. I'm just, I was fortunate enough to have these good parents, and they did provide, took care of me, and gave me a good sense of stability, and in just on a conventional family level. That when I was 18, I certainly could see all kinds of things I didn't like about them, but that's part of I think the growing up process where we learn, how to, we always need to, find our own self. We can't just, we have to sometimes break away from our parents in order to find ourselves. So there's always this sense of parental attachments, both ways. Parents attached to their children, and children trying to assert their independence. And this is about being human. And but in terms of like the thing that really helped me in the early years of monasticism, one thing like living in Thailand, where there is a lot of respect for parents as part of a cultural attitude. Where my American background, in my generation, we were always criticizing. When I started going to university, you take Psychology 101, and you learn all the things wrong with your parents. And it gives you psychological terms, you become an authority kind of on what mistakes your parents made and why you're suffering from lack of confidence or anxiety. It's because of your mother, usually. So, and then you go try to explain it to your mother, and she's broken-hearted. So, anyway, this is just the human condition. But each one of us have different experiences, with parents or lack of parents or whatever. So, And that's just the way it is, and this is why I encourage you to trust yourself to just be the observer of say, your own maybe resentments or anger, and not see it, just be the observer of it, not saying that you shouldn't have it or just see that it's because of your parents, but just it is what it is. So one time here, many years ago, one of the monks was giving a metta retreat, loving kindness retreat. And so with loving kindness, you're saying is, may all the beings in the world be free from suffering and happy, and to love all sentient beings. That's the grand macrocosmic view. And you get down from the macrocosmic to the micro and into particulars. So this was the time of Mrs. Thatcher, and she was Prime Minister, and metta for Mrs. Thatcher was quite difficult. Where all sentient beings was magnanimous, people could do that. And then this one woman was, came to me during the middle of this retreat in despair, because every time the monk started talking about parents, now spread loving kindness to your mother, this woman would just feel anger. So she said, I can't do this, I'm just a horrible person. Every day I have to spend loving kindness to my mother, and all that comes up is anger and resentment. And so I recognized the problem, that she was trying, she couldn't pretend on a kind of personal love or sense of love that for her mother that she didn't feel. And then she felt very guilty about that. She said, I must be a very bad person. I can't do it. Everybody else seems to be doing it but me. And so then I pointed to the fact that that this anger or resentment she had, to have metta for that, so metta then is not approving of it, but it's a willingness to bear with one's anger and not judge it as in a personal way as I shouldn't, or blame it on your mother, or feel guilty about it. But so this metta practice then is going into even a more particular sense of your own anger or resentment, which means then this metta is like just accepting it. It is like this anger, when the perception of mother comes in, then this is the emotion that I'm experiencing is like this. And that's what metta really means. It's not about feeling emotional love and liking, but it's loving kindness on this level is more like unconditioned. It's just willing to let something be what it is. And and especially when we have these kind of feelings, it's a way of accepting sometimes our own feelings, which is not justifying or rejecting them. And I found this, I couldn't do metta practice very well till I started having more metta from my own feelings. For 1 billion Chinese in China, I found no difficulty because I didn't know one of them. But for some of the monks and nuns, I found it very difficult. So because it gets down from a vast number of people that you don't know, and then it gets more into the known, like mother, father, or this monk or that monk, and then you're dealing with where your emotions are threatened. Like 1 billion Chinese are no threat to me at this moment. It's just a massive amount of Chinese over there. Now, if all 1 billion Chinese started invading the Dhamma hall, I might feel something else. But as long as they're over in China, then no problem. But then just one good monk who I find, that I don't like very much, even though he's a very good monk, to have metta. So then being aware of this aversion to this monk, have metta for that, doesn't mean I I am approving of my feeling, but it's a way of accepting what I'm feeling and not making a problem about it. So then I found that a lot of my resentments or personal tendencies towards liking or disliking starting to I've found much more sense of embracing life and freedom rather than just trying to, I like this monk and this nun, but this one I don't like, and get into personal emotional reactions to my personal preferences. And also found that this way it expands you. Is that before I became the people that I could accept was very narrow. I was too critical a person, so it had to be like this. And if you weren't like that, then I had nothing to do with you. And then living in the Sangha, you keep expanding those boundaries. And that's the good part. It's like learning. Like we all of us, the parents included, are working out our karma in some way or another. And it's not always that we like the way they're doing it or approve. It's not about liking or approving, but it's more, we begin to have more compassion for each other, a sense of understanding the human predicament, and that we can't be, a personality that everybody likes and loves or approves of, but and that you're living with, like in the monastery here, you're living with people that have very different. They're like, for me, of my generation, I find the younger generation mystified. I don't know where they're coming from half the time, because I'm from a totally different generation. And, so I don't know my emotional tendencies all developed during in the 30s and 40s. And so, it's a very different attitude, and the war, Second World War and so forth was, was part of my conditioning. And then you realize now, most of the monks, and I think probably all, or most of the monks and nuns, for them the Second World War is ancient history. Like the First World War was to me. I was born in 1934, and so, I didn't, so the First World War ended in 1918, didn't it? And so that seemed ancient history to me. But yet I recognize now how much the First World War affected me, because of I was educated and in a system that was the result of having fought the First World War, which to me, in terms of memory, was just like Civil War or Roman War with the Greeks or the Battle of Troy and what. And then now I realize Second World War, which is very vivid for me. American, I didn't suffer like they did here in Britain, but it's still very powerful, and attitudes of patriotism and American values were very strong formative impressions at that age, So I was 11 or 12 when the war ended in 1945. So that was, that's a very, and I have this fascination now with Second World War, like the Battle of Britain and all these people. They had this last month. They had kind of 70 years ago. The Battle of Britain took place here, and we're sitting here in Amaravati. Wonder what we wouldn't be sitting here so calmly with enemy aircraft flying over. And things like this are, because it did leave strong impressions that, say, younger generations didn't have. And then the Vietnam War, I was too old for that. And then now that's ancient history. So, these things do affect our the fashions, the tendencies, the attitudes of the time, how we see, how we perceive ourselves and the world around us. So my perceptions level, conditioned perception is very much formed during the 30s and 40s. And now the younger monks come their perceptions are formed from totally different things that don't mean anything to me very much. Like there's a lot of the pop music, I don't understand it in the least. And I remember thinking of my parents as being old-fashioned. Yes?
Because Buddhist monks often create conflict for themselves so they can watch what happens in the community, like sitting or even in Buddha or going somewhere scary to meditate. And I was wondering if that was useful for lay people if they want to do things like that.
I think we all have to test ourselves out in some degree. Like in the early years as a monk, I did a lot of, kind of ascetic practices just to find out what would happen. And because, I was brought up in a kind of middle-class atmosphere of that you didn't go without 3 meals a day, and it's so much just taken for granted. So, in Buddhist monasticism, like we're from what they call a Dhutanga tradition, where they have are like ascetic practices that the Buddha allowed. He didn't really favor asceticism. It's a kind of self-torture or mutilation or anything like that, but he did allow certain ascetic practices, not as not to get attached to them, but to see your own attachments to maybe 3 meals a day, or like in the monastery we had only 1 meal a day. I got used to that, and then I thought, what would it be like not to have a meal every other day? So I did it for a while, practicing eating every other day. Which just to see what would happen. Or I went on a fast where nothing, only water for a week. So I made these determinations, and it's horrible because and you don't have any salt or anything. The water just goes right through you, and you feel really. I didn't know how to fast. So I found that wasn't really the right way to do it. And then I did the salt water fast, where I'd take a bit of salt. That helps maintain the water, the liquid element in the body. Otherwise you just get very dehydrated. And that's very painful, very unpleasant. But I've been on a fast. I'm just coming off one. I still like to do it because it kind of like we call it detox. It does work, you do feel a sense of well-being if you fast in the right way. But it's like through kind of pushing your boundaries. But then Ajahn Chah, he'd let me do these things, but then if I became kind of obsessed with my ascetic practices, he'd keep pointing to the middle way, like, so that I began to not just see being a good monk was being as hard on myself and denying myself everything, just as trying to, that's can be quite conceited, because when you're really ascetic, you can feel a sense of superiority, Those monks, look at the way they eat food, and I don't. I'm not greedy. You can make it into a kind of conceit also, and that's where the mindfulness is really the way to deal with it. To see, your own tendency towards feeling you should test or do something special, And then, especially when you're young, you tend to want to find out what will happen. I was brought up in the, my mother thought if I didn't have 3 square meals a day, I'd faint and die. So I had this kind of obsession around, I had to have 3 meals a day. And then I become a monk with Ajahn Sumedho, I was in 1 meal a day. My mother was quite upset with that. And then, one time we had a famine, so I didn't get hardly anything. And I got malnutrition. So I wrote my mother and said, I'm now just trying to live on leaves off of trees. And she was very upset with that. But I found out, I can survive even in famine. I can, fortunately it didn't last long enough to where there's any great damage. But it's we tend to, especially from affluent societies like this one, we tend to see things we're quite spoiled in a way. We take a lot for granted. And so some of us need to test ourselves in regards to the assumptions that we have from our own cultural background.
It's almost 2,600 years since Lord Buddha was born. And there are very few realized persons, very few, is it anahats that you call them in Buddhism? The results tell me that isn't there any other easier way to unwind? because millions of people, billions of lives have been born and dead, and yet there are only a handful, or probably less.
How do you know? How do you? You just think there's only a few. I think if there were no arahants in the world, it would be a lot worse than it is. So.
We only know of very few prophets the world has produced. So.
Well, I mean, maybe known ones, but there's a lot probably are totally unknown. Not have no, aren't on Facebook or anything.
Another question is there a shortcut to this unwinding? Does it have to be so long and
I'm trying to point to a shortcut. No, I mean it does seem, because I understand what you're saying. Because when I went to Thailand, and your cultural background is very. You think you're looking in a particular cultural way at Thailand from American kind of cultural attitudes, and so I could see many things about the monks and that I didn't like or approve of, and so I used to think, well, I wonder how many are really enlightened or not. And then I began to see this conceit, my thinking that I'm able to judge who's enlightened and who isn't. And I think, who am I to know whether so and so is enlightened or not? And so then so I asked Ajahn Chah one time whether he was enlightened, and he made me look at my own desire to know about him. So, and I found that more helpful. And he says, yes, I am an enlightened arahant. And I think I probably would have doubted it, but because he did, he says how. And when at one time, because I saw him as the wise person than me as the student, then one time, and I've been practicing for quite a few years, so I asked him, what do you think of my practice, Ajahn Chah? Do you think I've attained stream entry? And because I thought he would know, and he said, "How should I know? You've got to know yourself." So this was his genius, was throwing you back and seeing what you're actually doing. And then, there's legends about arahants in the Himalayas and these wise sages and hermits, and then the Himalayas are a symbol of, where all these holy men live. And I used to, out of conceit in my cultural background, think, that's probably just rubbish. There aren't any arahants in the Himalayas. Name one. And now I would think there probably are. And then I think, if there weren't any, I think the world would be worse than it is. Because there is, wisdom is it's our, it isn't something so difficult or so kind of high and remote that only, when you see yourself in terms of the ego, you tend to see the Buddhist path as too difficult and too high, or the Arahant as somebody so advanced that you can't possibly hope to ever be like that. And that's how the thinking mind, the ego, works. Where when the mindfulness, you begin to see that it's not about being high or refined or subtle or anything like that, but it's learning to understand this right understanding, which is not about a high, specially achieved state, but it's our willingness to open to life and investigate and see for ourselves. So, and this is a remarkable thing about the Buddha's teaching, because it is 2,553-year-old teaching, and still it is. It works. It's not just something about old Indian philosophy or, ancient interest in anthropology or old Indian ways of thinking, and that it's not coming from that. It's very appropriate to the present time. That's why there's so many interested in a country like this that were never interested before, because it was not a part of our cultural attunement. But now, of course, with communication, there's so much interest in Buddhism all over the world that didn't exist 50 years ago. And why this particular religion? And because it does give us very skillful tools that are not just a kind of appreciation of ancient India, but it's about being human. And this, no matter how well educated we are, we don't understand our own humanity. We don't understand who we are and the limitation and what it is to be a human being on this planet. And we have our own cultural attitudes, cultural conditioning, social attitudes. But this is breaking through that whole illusion of conditioning to universal wisdom that we become attuned to through mindfulness. So don't despair. I'm sure that...
The status, this is also a famous question. They say this status cannot be given.
Right.
Find it yourself.
Yeah.
But somehow magically you can somehow kill our desires and arhats. I go to an arhat and somehow request him to kill my desires.
They can't. No. They can just encourage you to look at your desires. Because it's like, like even the Buddha, the founder, the Lord Buddha, couldn't enlighten his disciples. But he's always pointing, So his teachings are like pointers. And it's always pointing here, not to the personality, to the person, but to the mind and the way things are, to see it. So that's why the pointers are the same, whether it's ancient India or modern Britain. It's the human condition hasn't changed. The human ignorance and fear and desire are still much, exactly the same as they no doubt were in 2,500 years ago. And so that's why it does have great significance in modern life, because it's not about it's not about ancient religious philosophies or that. It's about suffering, its causes, and the how to let go of the causes of suffering, and to see, tune into ultimate reality, to begin to recognize it, and to cultivate this perspective of awareness and integrate it into the daily life that we live.
But I hear it takes thousands of years.
Don't believe it. No, that kind of thinking will not help you. Yes?
What's the purpose of practice Buddhism?
The purpose of the practice of Buddhism? Well, it is to, put it in simple terms, it's to awaken the individual. Like we think we're awake because our eyes are open, but we're very conditioned through, once you're born, a baby's born, then it's conditioned by the mother and the father and the brothers, sisters, and the family and the society. And so we acquire all the values and conditions of our particular ethnic identity or family or social identities. And so the aim of the Buddha is to awaken to Dhamma, to reality itself. So we're not operating through this conditioning anymore, just blindly through the conditioning we've received. We're not rejecting it either, but we're finding our relationship to the conditions rather than just being caught into the habitual attachment and operating always from the conditioned plane. So the word Buddha itself, it's a significant word, means awakened. It's about a human being awakening to Dhamma, to reality. So, in the Thai forest tradition, like most of the Thai forest teachers, the Ajahns, teach this Bhutto practice, where it's a kind of mantra. Bhutto is a kind of mantric form of Buddha, and that is like it. For me, I've used that just to for one thing, because I am such a clever thinker. I just started thinking Bhutto rather than proliferating in my mind. So, and then Bhutto also means like awakened. And then, so then I think, well, I'm awake, but then I'm caught into my own conditioning. I'm just, thinking I'm awake, my eyes are open, so I'm awake. But that's not really awake, because I'm operating from my ego or my fears and desires. And then with Bhutto, it reminds you to let go of those fears and desires, to observe them. And so then Buddha actually means awakened consciousness of a human individual. So like when we, in the traditional ceremony, we take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and that is, refuge is in awareness. It's not personal anymore, not like in what I think or what I believe in or what somebody else thinks or believes in. It's in this, like Bhutto. Now when I say Bhutang Saranam Gacchami, reminds me, this is awareness, taking refuge in an awakened attention before I start creating myself as a person or getting caught up in my own cultural conceits or emotional habits. And then your second refuge in Dhamma, Dhammang Saranam Gacchami, then you have this sense of awakening to reality. And what people call the real world is not the real world. It's not reality. The real world for most people is an illusion. So in this sense of awakening to reality is like you're awakening to Dhamma, to ultimate reality. And then Sangha, Sanghang Saranam Gacchami, is more like, it's like Sangha means those who practice those who are actually practicing in this right way. So that is like a refuge in this sense of, as a human being existing on this planet, this time, your refuge in the practice of meditation and awakening to Dhamma, to reality itself. So I like to, now for me, translating Dhamma is like reality. It's reality, rather than just some kind of Buddhist terminology, as if, because when you use an exotic word like Dhamma, it can mean, you start conceiving it as something it may not be at all. Where, for me, the word reality isn't about what I think is real or the real world. It's through this awareness that I begin to recognize and know reality as, and that's what Dhamma really is, when Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. So then this relationship of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha is like, I found this a perfect reminder in my life, which is non-personal. It's not me, Ajahn Sumedho, anymore, awakened. It's not like I'm awakened as a person, or that I know the reality, the real world, as a person. Suddenly the personality falls away. It doesn't make sense. And it would be very arrogant of me to claim it personally. But it's through this refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha that this is possible to see through the conceit of self and to awaken to reality, and not through, because you can't do through the ego or through cultural biases or even identities with Buddhism, but through the practice and the cultivation of mindfulness. Yes?
If you're aware everybody suffers sometimes, and how you deal with that, including yourself.
Well, what you can do is you've got to resolve it in your mind, your own suffering. Like you hear, the news of the day is sometimes horrendous. And, the things that go on. Just heard this morning on the news about the Americans, missiles bombed a village in Waziristan or someplace like that and killed a whole village full of people or something. And now that is, I've never suffered in that way. My life has been fortunate enough not to have to be involved in that kind of thing. But you hear about it all the time. Just the sorry about that. We just missed we were aiming at somebody else, and you just happened to be in the wrong place. Sorry. And so it becomes your collateral damage. It's a way of looking at the suffering around us in ways that we don't have to feel it. But as you more and more understand suffering, there's not much one can do about such things, in terms of being able to stop the Americans from doing such things. But we can at least resolve the problem in ourselves. That we can do. And then from there, if we have ability and influence, we can maybe have, encourage that towards skillful actions and respect for life and things. But until we really have resolved that in ourselves, then we don't fully understand the suffering in the world around us. And so I've been, how people can be so violent to each other. And I've been reading this book on the war in Yugoslavia, in the 90s. It's just heartrending, the way what happened, the bloody kind of destruction and mass murder of people, by the thousands, and and you think, how could they do that? How can you be so brutal to another human? And I've never been in a state where that has been even an option. It's just not part of my experience in life. But this was happening in the 90s. Here I was sitting in Amravati, and this kind of ethnic cleansing was going on in Yugoslavia, and so it really, the descriptions were horrendous. What people were doing to each other. Like, how can you do that? But yet the conditions, I don't understand. Don't live there, and I don't know. So many of these ethnic conditions are, unresolved. Like the Jewish question, for example. That's never been resolved in any definite way. Anti-Semitism. And so there's, you kind of suppress it or deny it, but also, the actual causes of such a condition have never been fully recognized by either side, by anti-Semites or by Semites. So there might be a few that do, but it's rare. And so when conditions arise, then we tend to react to ethnic biases or conditions, prejudices that we've acquired through our own ethnic identities, or what happened, to our group, our special ethnic group 300 years ago, and we can, you can actually promote anger and brutality by reflecting that 300 years ago your family murdered my great grandparents, and then you can, if I wasn't mindful, I could get wound up with wanting to butcher your family here and now. I mean, we're that highly influenced by prejudices, ethnic identities, cultural biases. So, and this is why it is important that you find the cause of suffering in yourself, because there's not that many humans that can do that. Just like this peace conference between Israel and the Palestinians, they're just so tender hooks. And somebody was telling me they were in Jerusalem, and they were in the Palestinian part of Jerusalem, where the Palestinian Israelis live, and they were describing that as, they don't have kind of fancy shopping centers and whatnot, but they have little shops, and they had kind of things like shops selling T-shirts. So this man went to look at the T-shirts, and he saw one with all these people in this kind of extreme sense of laughing, like bending over with belly laughs, And then on the back of the T-shirt it said, the peace. What is it? Peace in Israel and Palestine, something like that. And this is, because this is there's so many attempts to. It's always a kind of negotiating and testing each other out with total mistrust or no moral commitment to nonviolence, from either side, So it's like, there's no sense of even the first precept of respecting the right of a human individual to live. And so it's like, you bomb my side and then I bomb your side, and so it goes on into revenge and it just goes on and on until it finally, maybe it's suppressed for a while, but it'll rise again because the actual causes are never being addressed. It's just maybe they burn out or wear each other out a bit until the next time. So that's why, with the radical Islam, this Al-Qaeda and these kind of Taliban things. Now, I don't know very much about these things, but these are now the focus of the Western world, labeling them as the enemy. And then the way we can go around trying to kill them because they're the enemy. This is like we're not even respecting the first precepts. And we think we have to get rid of these extremists, but through violent means. And of course, you can't attain a peaceful end if you use violent means. So there's a sense of the end justifies the means. So if we use violence, it's to get rid of these disruptive people to have peace. But that's not the law of karma. It's not the way things actually are. To have peace, you've got to use peaceful means. The end, the means, and the end are really the same thing. To have peace, you have to use peaceful means. You can't have peace through violent means. And this is what we call the law of karma. You have the means. Then, if you want a peaceful end, then you use peaceful means. If you want to, if you want a apple tree, you don't plant pear seeds. You've got to use the right means to get the result that you hope, you long for. And I think this is like Mahatma Gandhi was emphasizing this in India in the 30s and 40s, where he was emphasizing this, trying to direct the move towards independence from the British using peaceful means rather than violent ones. And there were a lot of, in India at that time, there were a lot of radical Indians wanting to go and kill off the British and, terrorize them and force them to leave through violent means. And then Gandhi, who was a very kind of exceptional kind of human being, managed to hold them as best he could from taking violent action against the British. And because he knew the law of karma. You might kill off a lot of British, but you're not going to get a peaceful result from that. You're just creating more problems. And when the British did leave, then it was this partition, where and of course that was heartbreaking to see people, Muslims and Hindus, just killing each other en masse through these forced movements of partition. So that the whole thing, that Gandhi was pointing to the law of karma, and then in Buddhist monasticism, this is also, we find we can't get the end if we use the wrong means. So, like in monastic practice, we have this Vinaya and so forth, which we're using peaceful means always to practice awareness, not to just kill our bad thoughts or annihilate the enemy, but to develop this sense of restraint and watching and observing, in which we see things in perspective. So even the bad thoughts, or bad thoughts are seen in terms of they are what they are. We're not trying to kill them. We're just recognizing them, and then they cease on their own without me having to. As if I try to suppress bad thoughts, then I create a karmic connection of suppression of negativity, which has its own karmic result, which is not peaceful. So the whole aim of our life is to take responsibility for action and speech, but then the advice is to do good, refrain from doing bad things. So that's, our intention is toward skillful action rather than unskillful action. But in terms of what you're actually feeling, isn't always going to be skillful or unskillful. And so but your awareness of them, your awareness allows you to respond or not respond. So like if I have a nasty feeling about somebody wanting to harm them, I can be aware of that, and then I don't act on it. And it ceases. It goes in its own way, it's impermanent. And then if I have a feeling of wanting to help somebody that's in need of, some compassionate feeling and wanting to help somebody, I'm aware of that. But I don't attach to it, but I can act on it if I can. I can, if I have a way of helping that person, I'm quite willing to do that, to act in a skillful way towards them. And so this is where we have perspective on both the good and evil conditions, good and bad, heaven and hell in our own minds, where we're not taking sides anymore, but in terms of how we live our lives on this planet, in this society, is towards doing the good things, using our physical forms, our speech toward skillful action, and refraining from unskillful actions or unskillful speech. And then from there we can see the result is that, being a monk, this is my 44th year as a bhikkhu. I've had a long time to practice, to test this stuff out. And I think back now, 44 years, I'm so grateful for all the things I've never done or said because I'm a monk that I probably would have done if I wasn't. So I think gratitude for all the things I've never done. Unskillful actions I might have done if I didn't have such a commitment to this form, and it's got a very protective form. And all the things I've never said that I would have said if I was. So I think I'm better go.